internet, we could not have had mass demonstrations all over the world on one particular day.
Right.
And so the internet and email and all these are ways of getting information around to people, which the major media won't report. And I do believe it's beginning to have an effect.
Yeah.
And you know.
I like your optimism about
well,
that.
I don't know. You can. We'll base things very often on very little evidence, right? Like, well, there's big evidence like the polls. Okay, Bush has gone down below 50%. But little pieces of evidence. My wife and I were talking to the plumber who came around to fix a leaky faucet, right? Because I don't know how to fix a leaky faucet. The plumber comes around to fix a leaky faucet. This plumber, we've known for years, very silent person. Just comes, does his job, doesn't want to talk. This time he stops and he talks. And he's angry. He's angry because he just read that the Bush administration is spending wants $87 billion for the war. And he's saying, hey, what about things that we need? He says, I don't have health insurance, you know. And I'm thinking, how many people are there like that? You know, the guy in my local post office, the other day I walk in, and just out of the blue, he says, and I discovered, and he was also very quiet for a while, but, you know, I got to, you know, saw him again and again, never said a word. And then one day he says, I noticed that there's something wrong with his arm. And he said, I was in Vietnam. He said, these guys in Washington, these old guys in Washington, are sending young kids to war. Like me, I was 17. He says, you know, they're deceiving us all. So
Yeah.
these are, I mean, this is, as I say, tiny pieces of evidence, but what it suggests to me that I think that, and these guys, the plumber, the post office guy, they're not reading The Nation magazine. They don't go on the internet, but somehow, you know, the reality of what's happening is beginning to come through to them.
Yeah, my business manager, Bob Morgan, now for years we've had a good relationship, but a contentious relationship when it comes to talking about George Bush or anything. You know, he's a pretty definite Republican and conservative, and that's good. That's who I want managing my money, because God knows, you know, I need someone pulling back the reins. But always these disagreements, you know, like, man, can't tell you how many times I've sat and exasperated, like just dumbfounded how, you know, there's no getting through. And he calls me, I don't know, about a month ago. He says, Woody, he says, you were right. He finally shifted, like recently. He says, you've been right all along. All that stuff you've been saying, it's absolutely right. I was amazed, because I thought, now if he shifts, then anybody could shift.
What that says to me is that you talk to people who have different points of view. You talk to them over the years maybe, and you think you're not getting anywhere. You don't see any change, you know. And then one day, something happens. And what it suggests to me is that we should never stop talking to people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No matter how futile it seems at the moment. Because you never convert people to a different way of thinking. You never change their mind. You never make them... You never do it at the moment. You never see immediate results.
Right.
You see.
You can't change that.
No. But if you don't give up, if you persist in expressing yourself and you do it in a way that isn't hostile, but people may go back and think about it. And then a week later, a month later, a year later, something will happen.
Well, that makes me think, you know, I read your book, You Can't Stay Neutral on a Moving Train. I remember it because you were at Spelman College, right? And Yeah, I think that's where your activism really started with the civil rights movement, right?
Well, that's where, yeah, that's probably, yeah, that's,
I mean, would you say that that's not necessarily true?
well, no, right, I mustn't contradict you, right?
What?
No,
I'm used to
no.
being
I
contradicted,
know.
please.
I'm going to do what everybody else does. I'm going to contradict you.
Okay.
But no, that's probably the most important beginning of my activism. You know, I was active when I was 18, and I was a shipyard worker, and I was helping organize other young workers in the shipyard, you know. So I was sort of, I was active then. But it's true that my real first important involvement in activity was in the South, where I went to teach. I and my wife and kids moved down south to Atlanta, and I taught at Spelman College, which is a black women's college. They called it a Negro college at the time. And we were there for 7 years between 1956 and 1963, and those were the years of the movement. And so, yeah, I became involved. My wife became involved. Couldn't not be involved. In other words, here I was teaching about democracy, teaching about American history, teaching about liberty, teaching all these things. It's like you were saying about putting your hand over your heart, teaching all those things about America, teaching about these things. How could I just continue just staying in the classroom while my students were going out into the city, and they were sitting in, and they were getting arrested, and they were protesting, and they were boycotting? So no, there was no way that I could in good conscience stay out of that. So yeah, I became involved. And it was the greatest educational experience of my life. Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot more from my students than my students learned from me, I'm sure, in those 7 years, And, I became involved with SNCC. I was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is these young people, mostly black kids, young people who worked in the most dangerous places in the South, in Mississippi, and Southwest Georgia, and Alabama, Louisiana. And they worked for $10 a week, That's what they got from this organization. And they got to know people and lived in people's homes and met in churches. And they faced the police, and they went through all sorts of... I became involved with them and began to write about them and to participate with them. And it was the most educational experience of my life.
I remember you saying in the book, because people didn't really hear about what your students were doing and other people were doing in Atlanta and other areas of the South in the late 50s. I mean, people heard of Rosa Parks and what was going on with Martin Luther King and a lot of the people around him, but they didn't really hear all of the stuff that built up and added up to finally the movement, taking off, And it seems to me like that's what it was. The groundswell came from all those little acts along the way.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because what you describe is exactly the way the civil rights movement is described. Oh, there was Rosa Parks, there was a Montgomery bus boycott, there were the demonstrations in Birmingham, or there were the freedom. But in between and before all of those things, black people in the South were battering away at the system in little ways. Like, for instance, before the Montgomery bus boycott, and very few people know that, there was another bus boycott earlier, several years before that, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which preceded the Montgomery bus boycott. Before the sit-ins of 1960, there were sit-ins in other parts of the South which didn't get any attention. Right. And what it suggests is that when you engage in some small action which isn't noticed, isn't in the press, nobody pays any attention to it, you shouldn't believe that it's dead, that it has had no effect. Because, yeah, like you were saying, all those little things that people do, they add up. And suddenly one day they burst out, and you have a movement. And it's important to know that, because otherwise people get discouraged.